He was officially declared dead. His family received the telegram. His name was carved on a memorial. But 18 months later, he walked out of the jungle weighing 85 pounds, covered in scars, and carrying a secret that the military tried to bury for 50 years. This is the insane true story of the soldier who survived the impossible and the government didn't want you to know about it. November 8, 1965, the Central Highlands of Vietnam. Captain Jimmy Harrison sat in the co-pilot seat of a C-123 Provider cargo aircraft, cruising at 8,000 feet through clear blue sky. He was 28 years old, married for 3 years, and had a daughter he'd never met. She was born 2 weeks after he deployed. This was supposed to be a routine supply run. Fly to a remote Special Forces camp, drop off ammunition and medical supplies, fly back to base before dark. Easy day. Milk run. The kind of mission that lets you catch up on sleep. But in Vietnam, routine was a word that got soldiers killed. Harrison's aircraft was part of Operation Ranch Hand, the controversial program that sprayed chemical defoliants across the Vietnamese jungle. But today, they weren't spraying. They were just hauling cargo. The pilot, Major Tom Berkeley, was humming along to a song in his head, hand resting casually on the yoke. The loadmaster in the back was reading a paperback novel, feet propped up on a stack of ammunition crates. Nobody saw it coming. At exactly 13:42 hours, the starboard engine exploded. Not sputtered, not failed, exploded. A 12.7 millimeter heavy machine gun round, fired from a camouflaged position in the valley below, punched through the engine cowling and detonated the fuel line. The engine didn't just stop, it tore itself apart in a cascade of shrapnel and flame. The C-123 lurched violently to the right. Berkeley fought the controls, but the aircraft was already dying. Hydraulic fluid was spraying across the windscreen. The fire warning lights lit up like a Christmas tree. The master caution alarm was screaming. Harrison grabbed the radio transmitter. His voice was eerily calm, the product of hundreds of hours of training. "Mayday! Mayday! Mayday! Racer 2-3 is going down. We have catastrophic engine failure. Position is—" He never finished the sentence. The second engine seized, the propeller locked up solid, and the sudden asymmetric thrust flipped the aircraft into an uncontrollable roll. The G-forces slammed Harrison against his harness so hard his vision went gray. The C-123 was now a 35-ton brick falling out of the sky at 200 miles per hour. Through the spinning windscreen, Harrison caught glimpses of green canopy rushing up to meet them. Trees, hundreds of feet tall, a solid carpet of jungle that would shred the aircraft like a cheese grater. Berkeley was screaming something, but Harrison couldn't hear over the wind howling through the fuselage. He reached for the ejection handle, then remembered this aircraft didn't have ejection seats. There was no escape. No parachutes would deploy at this altitude with this spin rate. They were going to die. The last thing Harrison remembered was the sound of tearing metal and the sensation of the world exploding into splinters. And everything went black. 3 days later, 8,000 miles away, in a small house in Iowa, Margaret Harrison was folding laundry when the doorbell rang. She wasn't expecting visitors. She walked to the front door, baby Emily balanced on her hip, and looked through the window. 2 men in army dress uniforms stood on her porch. They weren't smiling. Margaret's heart stopped. Every military wife knew what 2 uniformed officers at your door meant. She'd had nightmares about this exact moment since Jimmy deployed. She stood frozen, unable to move, unable to breathe. The doorbell rang again. She opened the door with shaking hands. The older officer removed his cap. "Mrs. Harrison, "I'm Colonel Richard Davis. May we come in?" She didn't remember letting them in. She didn't remember sitting down. She just remembered the words that came next, delivered in a carefully rehearsed monotone designed to convey sympathy without emotion. "On behalf of the President of the United States and a grateful nation, I regret to inform you that your husband, Captain James Robert Harrison, was killed in action on November 8, 1965, when his aircraft was shot down over hostile territory in the Republic of Vietnam." The colonel kept talking, something about honor, sacrifice, and how Jimmy's remains had not been recovered, but he was presumed dead. Something about burial benefits and survivor benefits and flag presentations. Margaret didn't hear any of it. She was staring at baby Emily, who was looking up at her with Jimmy's eyes and realizing that her daughter would never know her father. The funeral was held 2 weeks later at Arlington National Cemetery. There was no body, just an empty casket draped with an American flag. A 7-man rifle team fired 3 volleys into the gray November sky. A bugler played taps. Margaret was handed the folded flag and a Purple Heart in a presentation case. The file was closed. The name Captain James R. Harrison was added to the Vietnam Veterans Memorial wall design plans. To the military, to the government, to the world, Jimmy Harrison was dead. But 2,000 miles in the Vietnamese jungle, something impossible was happening. Jimmy Harrison was waking up.
Pain. That was the first thing. Not sight, not sound, just pure, white-hot, all-consuming pain radiating from everywhere at once. Harrison tried to open his eyes, but his right eye wouldn't respond. He could only see through his left eye, and what he saw made no sense. Green. Everything was green. Not the green of a hospital room or a barracks, the deep, living green of vegetation so thick it blocked out the sun. He was lying on his back, staring up through a broken canopy of jungle leaves. Vines hung down like curtains. The air was so humid he felt like he was breathing underwater. He tried to move his right arm. It didn't respond. He looked down and immediately wished he hadn't. His right arm was bent at an angle that arms aren't supposed to bend. The bone had broken clean through, and his flight suit was soaked black-red with dried blood. His right leg was pinned under a twisted piece of aircraft fuselage, a section of aluminum that had his leg trapped from mid-thigh to ankle. He couldn't feel the leg. That was either very good or very bad. Memories came flooding back in jagged fragments. The explosion, the spin, the impact, the world tearing itself apart. Where was Berkeley? Where was the loadmaster? Harrison turned his head, the only part of his body that still seemed to work properly, and looked around. 10 feet to his left, he saw what was left of the cockpit. It had separated from the rest of the fuselage and smashed into a massive tree trunk. The instrument panel was embedded in the tree like a piece of modern art. Major Berkeley was still strapped into the pilot's seat. Or rather, what was left of him was still strapped in. Harrison looked away quickly, fighting the urge to vomit. He'd found Berkeley. He didn't need to search for the loadmaster. If Berkeley looked like that, the loadmaster was gone too. He was alone. Harrison took inventory of his situation with the cold logic of a trained officer. Injuries: compound fracture of the right arm, possible fracture of the right leg, head trauma. His right eye was swollen shut and crusted with dried blood. Multiple lacerations, probable internal injuries. Location: unknown. Somewhere in the Central Highlands. Could be 5 miles from friendly forces. Could be 50. Could be deep in enemy-controlled territory. Supplies: whatever was in his survival vest and whatever he could salvage from the wreckage. Time till rescue: unknown. If they'd received his Mayday transmission, search and rescue would be looking for the crash site. But the jungle canopy was so thick they'd never spot the wreckage from the air. Enemy activity, unknown. The gunfire that brought them down meant enemy forces were nearby. They would have seen the crash. They would be coming to search for survivors and salvage weapons. Harrison had maybe hours before enemy troops arrived, maybe less. He had to move. But he couldn't move. His leg was pinned under 200 pounds of aircraft aluminum. He tried to push the wreckage off with his left arm, the only limb still fully functional. The metal didn't budge. It was wedged against the tree root and the ground. Pain shot up his leg as he shifted his weight. That was good. It meant the leg wasn't completely severed, but it also meant he could feel what was about to come next. Harrison reached down to his survival vest and pulled out his Air Force-issue survival knife. The blade was 4 inches of carbon steel, designed for cutting parachute lines and opening ration cans. He was about to use it for something very different. He couldn't cut through aluminum, but he could cut through his boot, through the leather, through the laces. If he could get his foot out of the boot, maybe, just maybe, he could slide his leg out from under the wreckage. He started cutting. The leather was thick and wet with blood, but the blade was sharp. He sawed through the laces, then started cutting away the boot material itself, peeling it back like the skin of an orange. His foot was a mess, purple and swollen, possibly broken, but it was still attached. He gritted his teeth and pulled. The pain was indescribable. It felt like his leg was torn off. He screamed, a raw animal sound that echoed through the jungle and sent birds scattering from the trees. But his leg came free. Harrison lay there gasping, stars exploding across his vision. For a moment he thought he was going to pass out, but passing out meant death. Death meant never seeing Margaret, never meeting his daughter. He forced himself to stay conscious. He rolled onto his stomach, an agonizing process that took 5 minutes, and started crawling. He had no idea where he was going. He just knew he had to get away from the crash site before the enemy arrived. He crawled for 10 feet before he heard the voices. They were speaking Vietnamese. Multiple voices, getting closer. Harrison's blood went ice cold. The enemy had found the crash site. Harrison froze, pressed flat against the jungle floor, barely breathing. Through the dense undergrowth, he could see movement, figures in dark green uniforms moving through the wreckage with practiced efficiency. North Vietnamese Army regulars, not local Viet Cong guerrillas. These were trained soldiers. There were at least 6 of them, possibly more. They were searching the crash site methodically, checking bodies, collecting identity tags, gathering intelligence documents. One soldier was examining Berkeley's body, going through his pockets. Another was photographing the wreckage with a Soviet-made camera. They were treating this like an intelligence gold mine, which it was. Harrison realized with horrifying clarity that if they found him alive, he wouldn't be killed quickly. An American pilot was valuable. He'd be interrogated, tortured, paraded on North Vietnamese propaganda broadcasts. He'd seen the photos of American POWs, emaciated, broken men with dead eyes, forced to read confessions on camera. He would rather die than become that. But he wasn't going to die, not today. Harrison started crawling again, inch by painful inch, using his left arm and his good leg to drag himself across the jungle floor. His broken right arm hung useless at his side. Every movement sent waves of pain through his body, but he bit down on his lip until he tasted blood and kept moving. The undergrowth was his salvation. The jungle floor was covered with ferns, fallen logs, and thick layers of decomposing leaves. He crawled under a massive fern plant, pulling dead leaves over him as camouflage. Behind him, he heard the Vietnamese soldiers calling to each other. One of them had found the drag marks, the trail of disturbed leaves and blood that Harrison had left behind. They knew someone survived. They knew someone was close. The hunt was on. Harrison heard footsteps approaching his hiding spot, boots crunching on dead leaves, getting closer, 10 feet away, then 5. A soldier walked past so close that Harrison could see the stitching in his canvas boots. The soldier was young, maybe 19 or 20, carrying an AK-47 rifle and scanning the jungle with alert eyes. Harrison held his breath. His heart was pounding so hard he could certain the soldier would hear it. The soldier stopped. He was looking directly at the fern plant Harrison was hiding under. Harrison's hand moved slowly to his survival knife. If the soldier found him, Harrison would have one chance, one desperate, probably futile attempt to fight. A wounded man with a knife against a healthy soldier with an automatic rifle. The math wasn't good.
The soldier took a step toward the fern. Then a voice called out from the crash site, a sharp command in Vietnamese. The soldier turned and jogged back toward the wreckage, responding to his officer. Harrison exhaled slowly, his entire body shaking. That was too close. He waited until the voices faded, until he was certain the soldiers had moved away from his position. Then he started crawling again. He crawled for what felt like hours, but was probably only 30 minutes. Every few yards, he had to stop and rest, fighting the urge to pass out from pain and blood loss. He found a small stream, barely more than a trickle of water running between moss-covered rocks. He collapsed next to it and drank deeply, sucking up the cool water like a dying man, which, technically, he was. The water helped clear his head. He assessed his situation again. Good news, he was still alive. He'd escaped the immediate search. He had water. Bad news, literally everything else. He was deep in enemy territory with catastrophic injuries. He had no radio. It had been destroyed in the crash. He had no map. It had been in his flight suit pocket, which was now just shredded fabric. He had minimal supplies. Search and rescue wouldn't find him. The crash site was too deep in the jungle, too far from friendly lines. He was on his own. Harrison reached into his survival vest and took inventory of what he had. One survival knife, now bloody. One signal mirror, useless without aircraft overhead. One strobe light, batteries probably dead. One package of water purification tablets. 3 energy bars. One small first aid kit. And a .38 caliber revolver with 6 rounds. The revolver was standard issue for air crews. It was meant for self-defense against wild animals or as a last resort for captured pilots who preferred death to torture. Harrison looked at the gun for a long moment. It would be easy. 1 bullet, no more pain, no more fear. But then he thought about Margaret, about baby Emily growing up without a father, about the telegram that had already been delivered, the funeral that probably had already happened. They thought he was dead. He'd be damned if he was going to prove them right. Harrison put the gun back in the vest. He took out one of the morphine syrettes, a small tube with a needle on one end. He jabbed it into his thigh and pushed the plunger. Within seconds, the pain became manageable. Not gone, just distant enough that he could think clearly. He used materials from the first aid kit to improvise a splint for his broken arm, binding it against his chest with strips of torn fabric from his flight suit. Then he faced the impossible question, what now? He couldn't stay here. The enemy would expand their search. They had dogs. They had trackers who could follow his blood trail. He had to move, but move where? Harrison thought back to his briefings. The Central Highlands were massive, thousands of square miles of jungle-covered mountains. But he remembered something. There were Montagnard villages scattered throughout the region. The Montagnards were indigenous people who'd been recruited by special forces to fight against the North Vietnamese. If he could find a friendly village, he might survive. Big if. But it was the only option. Harrison chose a direction, east toward the rising sun, and started crawling. He crawled for 3 days. Time stopped meaning anything. Day blurred into night. Pain became a constant companion, a living thing that wrapped around Harrison's body like barbed wire. He crawled during daylight hours, hiding in dense vegetation whenever he heard sounds that might be enemy patrols. He drank from streams when he found them. He ate nothing. His 3 energy bars ran out on the first day. His broken arm became infected. He could see the red streaks spreading up toward his shoulder, blood poisoning, sepsis. Without antibiotics, it would kill him in a matter of days. His leg wasn't much better. The boot removal surgery had worked, but the leg was purple and swollen to twice its normal size. He couldn't put any weight on it. On the 4th day, the morphine ran out. The pain came roaring back with a vengeance. Harrison screamed into the dirt, biting down on a stick to keep from passing out. On the 5th day, he developed a fever. His vision started playing tricks on him. He saw Margaret standing in the jungle, holding Emily, smiling at him. He crawled toward her, but she faded like smoke. He was hallucinating, dying. On the 6th day, he found the trail. It was barely visible, just a slight depression in the jungle floor where generations of feet had worn away the vegetation. But it was definitely a path made by humans. Harrison sat at the edge of the trail, facing another impossible decision. Trails meant people. People could mean salvation, a friendly village, Montagnard allies, possible rescue. Or trails could mean death, enemy patrols, Viet Cong ambushes, capture. He had no way to know which. But he couldn't crawl anymore. His body was shutting down. This was his last chance. Harrison dragged himself onto the trail and started following it. He didn't have to wait long. An hour later, he heard voices ahead. Multiple people speaking in a language he didn't recognize, not Vietnamese, something else, melodic and tonal, Montagnard language. Hope surged through Harrison's chest, but hope was dangerous. What if they were hostile? What if they turned him over to the North Vietnamese for a reward? He had no choice. He was out of options. Harrison dragged himself around a bend in the trail and came face to face with 3 men carrying spears and crossbows. They froze, staring at him. Harrison stared back. For a long moment, nobody moved. Then Harrison raised his left hand, his only working hand, in what he hoped was a universal gesture of peace. "American," he croaked. His voice was barely recognizable, ravaged by days without speaking. "Friend, Bác sĩ," the Vietnamese word for doctor, the only word he could remember. The 3 men looked at each other, speaking rapidly in their language. Then one of them stepped forward, an older man with gray hair and scars covering his arms. He knelt down next to Harrison and examined his injuries with experienced eyes. The old man said something to the other 2. They nodded and disappeared into the jungle. The old man looked at Harrison and said a single word in broken English. "Live." Harrison didn't remember what happened next. His body finally surrendered to the fever and the pain and the exhaustion. He passed out. Harrison woke up in hell. At least that's what he thought at first. He was lying on a bamboo mat inside a small hut made of woven grass and wood. The walls were covered with strange symbols he didn't recognize. Smoke from the fire pit filled the air with a thick, acrid haze. Every inch of his body hurt, but it was a different kind of pain now, the pain of healing rather than dying. He tried to sit up. A hand pressed gently but firmly on his chest, pushing him back down. A woman's face appeared above him, wrinkled and ancient, with eyes that held both wisdom and sadness. She spoke to him in Montagnard, then switched to heavily accented English. "No move, you very sick, bad spirit in arm." Harrison looked at his right arm. It had been cleaned and properly splinted. The red streaks of infection were still there, but they'd stopped spreading. Some kind of poultice, a paste made from jungle plants, had been applied to the wound. It smelled terrible, but apparently worked. "Where?" Harrison's voice cracked. "Where am I?" "Village," the old woman said simply. "We hide you. Enemy look for American. We say no American here." Harrison's mind slowly processed this. The Montagnards had lied to enemy search parties. They'd hidden him. They'd saved his life. "How long?" he asked. 2 moon, the old woman said, holding up 2 fingers. 2 months. He'd been unconscious or delirious for 2 months. It was January 1966. Back home, his family had already mourned him. His name was probably already carved on a memorial. Officially, Captain James Harrison was dead. The old woman brought him food, a thin broth from rice and some kind of meat he couldn't identify. He ate it gratefully, not caring what it was. Over the following weeks, Harrison slowly regained strength. The Montagnards nursed him back from the edge of death with a combination of traditional medicine and sheer determination. But he quickly learned the horrifying reality of his situation. He was trapped. The village was deep in a region completely controlled by the North Vietnamese army. There were no American forces within 50 miles. There were no roads, no radios, no way to signal for rescue. The jungle had swallowed him whole. The village chief, the old man who'd found him, explained through the translator woman that they couldn't risk moving him. Enemy patrols came through the area regularly. If they found an American pilot, they would kill everyone in the village as punishment for harboring the enemy. So Harrison stayed, hidden, silent, a ghost living among ghosts. He learned the Montagnard language slowly. He learned their customs. He learned to move silently through the jungle despite his injuries. He learned which plants were edible and which were poison. He learned to survive. Months passed. His family thought he was dead. His country thought he was dead. He was erased from existence, a man who fell through the cracks of history. But Harrison refused to give up. Every night he would sit outside the hut and look up at the stars, the same stars Margaret could see back in Iowa, and he would whisper to her across the distance, "I'm alive. I'm coming home. I promise."
18 months after the crash, Harrison made a decision. He couldn't stay in the village forever. He couldn't hide in the jungle while his family mourned a man who wasn't dead. He was going to walk out. It was insane. It was suicidal. The nearest American base was over 80 miles away through enemy-controlled jungle. He had no map, no compass, no supplies beyond what he could carry in a handmade pack. His right arm had healed, but it would never work properly again. His right leg was functional, but weak. He'd lost 60 pounds. He looked like a skeleton wrapped in sun-damaged skin.
The village chief tried to talk him out of it. The old woman who'd nursed him back to health begged him to wait. They told him he would die in the jungle. But Harrison had survived the impossible crash. He'd survived catastrophic injuries. He'd survived months in enemy territory. He could survive this. The villagers gave him what they could: a small amount of rice, a container for water, a Montagnard crossbow for hunting, and a hand-drawn map showing the direction to the nearest American firebase, assuming it still existed. Harrison said goodbye to the people who'd saved his life, knowing he would never see them again. Then he walked into the jungle. The journey took 47 days. He walked at night, navigating by stars. He hid during the day. He avoided trails. He moved like a ghost, silent, invisible, a phantom drifting through the green hell. He nearly died a dozen times, from hunger, from fever, from infected cuts, from nearly stepping on a bamboo viper, from almost walking into an enemy patrol. But he kept moving. On day 47, he stumbled out of the jungle onto a dirt road and came face to face with an American patrol. The young soldiers raised their rifles, shouting him to identify himself. Harrison raised his hands and spoke in a voice that hadn't spoken English in months. Captain James Harrison, serial number 2478391, United States Air Force. The soldiers stared at him like a ghost. One of them lowered his rifle, face pale. "Sir, Captain Harrison is dead. He died in a plane crash 2 years ago." Harrison smiled, a broken, exhausted smile. "Reports of my death," he said, "have been greatly exaggerated." You'd think Harrison's return would be celebrated as a miracle, a triumph of human spirit, a story of impossible survival. Instead, the military tried to bury it. The official line was simple. Captain Harrison had been recovered from a prisoner of war camp. Details were classified. No media interviews, no public statements. Why? Because Harrison's survival was an embarrassment. The military had declared him dead prematurely. They'd notified his family. They held a funeral. His name was already on memorial plans. Admitting they'd made a mistake would raise uncomfortable questions. What about the other 1,600 servicemen declared killed in action, body not recovered? How many of them might still be alive, waiting for rescue that would never come? The Pentagon couldn't afford those questions, so they classified Harrison's entire file. They made him sign non-disclosure agreements. They essentially made him a ghost for a second time, alive but invisible. Harrison was reunited with his family in a closed-door ceremony. No cameras, no press. Emily, now 2 years old, didn't recognize him. Harrison was medically retired with full benefits and a chest full of medals he was told never to wear in public. He spent the next 50 years living a quiet life, forbidden from telling his story. He died in 2015 at age 78. Only after his death did the military declassify portions of his file, and even then, huge sections remained redacted. Here's what makes this story so powerful. Harrison wasn't the only one. Declassified documents from the 1990s revealed that dozens of American servicemen survived crashes and captures, but were declared dead due to bureaucratic errors, political pressure, or simple incompetence. Some were held in secret prison camps for years. Some escaped and survived in the jungle. Some were killed after the military stopped looking for them. The famous POW MIA flag, the black flag with the white silhouette, exists because families refused to believe their loved ones were dead without proof. They were right to be skeptical. Harrison's story proves that miracles happen, that the impossible is sometimes possible, that one man with enough determination can literally walk out of hell. But it also proves something darker, that sometimes the most dangerous enemy isn't on the battlefield. It's the bureaucracy that would rather bury an uncomfortable truth than admit a mistake. If this story of impossible survival gave you chills, slam that like button, subscribe, and turn on notifications because we're bringing you the true stories that history tried to hide. Comment below. Would you have tried to walk out or waited for rescue? Drop your thoughts. We read every single comment. These stories matter. These men matter. Share this video so their sacrifices aren't forgotten. Thank you for watching. Thank you for remembering. And we'll see you in the next mission.